My name is Naomi Whitaker. I am 64 years old, a retired psychology professor living quietly in Seattle. For most of my life, I believed that my years of teaching others about resilience had prepared me for the storms of my own existence. But nothing could have prepared me for the call that shattered my world at exactly 2:17 a.m. The shrill ring of the phone pierced the stillness of my bedroom. When I answered, the voice on the other end was clinical, rehearsed, and unshakably final. My son Jake, my only child, had been pronounced dead. The words seemed impossible, foreign, as though I had misheard them. Yet the silence that followed was heavier than any nightmare. I remember clutching the edge of my nightstand, whispering his name, hoping it would somehow undo what I had just heard. If you have ever answered a call in the middle of the night that tore the ground out from beneath you, you will understand the way my chest caved in. I could not breathe. I could not even think. Only the instinct to move kept me alive. I pulled on the nearest coat, grabbed my keys, and drove through the dark Seattle streets toward the hospital, headlights cutting across the rain that seemed to fall harder the faster I drove. Before I continue, let me gently say this. If stories of family, love, and survival touch something inside you, I invite you to stay with me. Share where you are watching from, or tell me if you too have ever been forced to hold a secret heavier than your heart could carry. These stories keep us connected, even when the world tries to break us apart. By the time I reached the hospital, dawn was still hours away. The corridor smelled of antiseptic and sorrow. A nurse guided me to a small room with dim lighting. There, behind a closed door, I saw Jake, lying motionless on the bed. My legs nearly gave way beneath me. I pressed my palm against the cold frame, begging for this to be a cruel mistake. But his skin was pale, his chest still, and my son, the boy I once rocked to sleep, the man who grew into a defender of justice, was gone. I wanted to hold him, to scream, to collapse. But instead, my training in composure became a curse. My tears came silently, rolling down my cheeks as though even grief had been instructed to remain dignified. The nurse touched my shoulder, but her words slipped away before they reached me. All I could hear was the echo of the call, repeating over and over, as if it would never let me go. Sienna, Jake's wife, arrived much later than she should have. She swept into the room with her makeup intact, her black coat unwrinkled, her composure so polished it felt rehearsed. She clutched my hand with fingers that trembled just enough to be convincing, and then pressed her forehead against Jake's without a tear staining her skin. To anyone else, she might have looked like the perfect widow. But I noticed what others didn't. The way her eyes darted toward her phone, the way her grip loosened quickly as if the act of touching grief was inconvenient. It wasn't just her lateness that unsettled me. In the hallway outside, as she thought no one was listening, I caught her whisper under her breath. The words were quiet but sharp enough to cut. "We can finish this conversation later." Who was she speaking to? The nurse at the desk hadn't asked her anything. She had not been on the phone. Those words weren't meant for me or for the staff. They were meant for someone else, someone I did not yet know. The ache in my chest deepened when I realized Owen, my 8-year-old grandson, had not been brought with her. My son's child, his only child, had been left at school while his father lay cold in a hospital bed. In that moment, I knew something was broken. Not just the life we had lost, but the bonds that were supposed to hold what remained. I stood at Jake's bedside long after Sienna drifted away to make hushed calls in the corridor. I whispered promises to my son, words only a mother can carry, that I would protect his boy, that I would stay silent when silence was strength, and that I would endure whatever storm his absence would unleash. I had no idea then how deep that silence would need to go, or how much darker the storm would become. The morning of Jake's funeral felt like the sky itself had lowered its head. A thin mist clung to the cemetery grounds, the kind that seeps into your bones and lingers long after the service is over. I stood beside the casket, my gloved hands wrapped around the program that listed my son's name in bold print, a name I could hardly believe had already been carved into stone. Every breath of air tasted like loss. Sienna played her part with perfect precision. She wore black silk, her veil resting just so, her lips trembling at all the right moments. To the guests, she was the picture of a grieving widow. People leaned in to comfort her, placing sympathetic hands on her back, whispering words of pity. She accepted it with practiced grace, her posture regal, her sorrow performed. But I knew her too well. Her tears never quite reached her eyes. Standing a few steps behind her was a man I had never met before, though his presence was impossible to ignore. Damien Cross. His gaze lingered on Sienna longer than it should have, his hand brushing her arm under the pretense of steadying her. To everyone else, it may have looked like compassion. To me, it looked like ownership. The air between them carried an intimacy that did not belong in mourning. I watched as Owen clutched the hem of my coat, his small fingers twisting the fabric, his face pale with confusion. He did not cry loudly, but he pressed his cheek against my side as if searching for something steady to hold. When he glanced at his mother, she smiled faintly, just enough for the crowd to see, before turning back to Damien with an expression too composed for grief. My grandson's grip tightened. I leaned down and kissed the crown of his head, silently promising I would not let him drift alone. As the minister spoke of Jake's dedication to justice, of his kindness and strength, I caught Marcus Chen's eye across the gathering. He gave me a subtle nod, one that carried weight beyond sympathy. After the service, as people began drifting toward the reception hall, Marcus approached me. His voice was low, carefully measured. "Naomi, I need you to trust your instincts," he said. "Jake left certain things in order. There's a protocol we'll need to discuss when the time is right." I frowned, clutching my program tighter. What kind of protocol? He glanced toward Sienna, who was laughing softly at something Damien whispered. The sound grated against the solemn air. Marcus lowered his voice even more. "Not here. Just know that Jake was deliberate. He wanted to make sure you and Owen would be safe." Those words tightened the knot in my stomach. Jake had always been meticulous, but for Marcus to speak of safety at his funeral meant there were things I did not yet know. I nodded, though my mind was already racing. Back inside the hall, I stood near the buffet table, watching Sienna glide through the crowd like a hostess at a gala. She accepted condolences with delicate smiles, even managing to joke about the flowers someone had sent. Damien hovered at her side, filling her glass, guiding her through conversations as if they were partners rehearsed in a private play. No one else seemed to notice how often their shoulders touched, how easily she leaned into him when she thought eyes were turned away. I kept my silence, though every instinct screamed at me to speak. Instead, I focused on Owen, on the way he sat at a corner table tracing circles into the condensation on his glass of water. He looked up at me once, his eyes wide and searching, and I forced a smile I did not feel. That night, when I returned home, I replayed the day's images over and over, the veil that never wet with tears, the hand that lingered too long, the nod from Marcus that carried secrets. The mask Sienna wore might have fooled the mourners, but to me, cracks had already begun to show. In the days after the funeral, my house in Seattle became both a sanctuary and a prison. The air smelled faintly of lilies left over from the service, and the silence pressed down like a heavy quilt. Owen spent most evenings at my kitchen table, coloring in his notebooks while I prepared simple meals. I could see the shadows in his eyes, the way grief settled differently in children. He did not wail or demand answers. Instead, he grew quiet, observant, asking only the kinds of questions that pierced straight through a grandmother's heart. I remembered the times Jake had entrusted him to me when court deadlines kept him late at the office. He would drop Owen off with his favorite backpack, kiss his son's forehead, and remind me with a grin, "Mom, You're better at bedtime stories than I am." It was in one of those evenings, long before his death, that Jake had slipped a small leather-bound notebook into my kitchen drawer. Now, weeks later, as I cleaned, I found it again. Across the cover, in Jake's tidy handwriting, were the words, "Routine for Owen." Inside were pages of careful notes: what Owen liked for breakfast, how he needed the nightlight left on, which lullabies soothed him quickest. But beneath those pages, tucked discreetly, was a sheet of instructions about emergencies, financial accounts, and contacts. I felt my throat tighten. It was as though Jake had anticipated the weight that now sat squarely on my shoulders. Meanwhile, Sienna showed little interest in Owen's needs. She arrived one afternoon, perfume heavy in the air, asking if I had the paperwork for Jake's estate. Her words were clipped, businesslike. "We should talk about the house," she said, her eyes scanning my living room as though measuring what could be hers. I placed a hand over the notebook and forced a calm smile. Jake wanted things handled with care. Right now, Owen needs stability more than anything. She waved my words away, already scrolling through her phone. "There are assets that shouldn't sit idle." "It's inefficient. I'll have Marcus set up a meeting." I caught the contradiction immediately. Marcus had already hinted at things Sienna clearly didn't know. Her eagerness to move forward so quickly only deepened my suspicion. Still, I said nothing. Instead, I chose silence as my shield, knowing that every word I withheld was another layer of protection. That night, I sat in my armchair, the notebook in my lap, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside. I thought of Jake, of how he had tried to prepare me, and of how Sienna's mask of grief had already begun to slip. Anger burned in my chest, but I pressed it down. My silence would be my strength. I would wait, I would watch, and when the time came, I would be ready. The meeting with Marcus took place in his downtown office, a space filled with polished oak shelves and the faint scent of old legal texts. I sat across from him, hands folded tightly in my lap, Owen sketching quietly beside me. My heart pounded as Marcus placed a sealed envelope on the table, his expression solemn but steady. "Naomi," he said gently. Jake updated his will not long before he passed. He was deliberate. He wanted this read with you present, not in a crowded courtroom. I leaned forward, every nerve alert. He broke the seal and unfolded the papers with the care of a man who understood the gravity of each word. His voice carried a firmness that made every syllable settle deep into my chest. Jake's assets totaled $10 million. Hearing the figure out loud felt unreal, almost absurd against the backdrop of loss. My son, who had always worn modest suits and driven an aging sedan, had built a fortune through cases, investments, and careful planning. Marcus explained each line. The trust structured for Owen, the safeguards in place until he came of age, and then the part that made my pulse quicken. Naomi Whitaker named as the sole trustee. I gripped the arm of my chair. My son had not left this world without leaving a plan. His faith in me was both comforting and crushing. Sienna arrived late, again. She swept into the room, her heels striking the polished floor like gavel knocks, her perfume arriving before her words. When Marcus read aloud the section that designated her a separate $500,000 insurance policy, independent of the trust, her smile faltered. The mask cracked for just an instant before she caught herself, straightening her back as if her pride could hold her together. This can't be right," she said, her voice sharp with disbelief. "I'm his wife." "I should be trustee, not his mother." Marcus's eyes met hers without wavering. Jake made these decisions with clarity. The documents were updated and notarized only weeks ago. There is no ambiguity. Sienna's gaze darted to me, a storm gathering in her eyes. I kept my own expression calm, though my pulse raced. I wanted to shout, to ask her why her grief seemed so thin, why her focus turned so quickly to money. But I remained silent. I let Marcus's words carry the weight, while I stayed the steady presence Jake must have hoped I would be. Owen tugged my sleeve, whispering, "Grandma, does this mean we're safe?" His innocence sliced through the tension like a blade. I brushed his hair back, whispering, "It means your dad thought of everything." Sienna rose abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I'll be contesting this." "You haven't heard the last of me." Her heels echoed down the corridor as she stormed out, leaving the office heavy with her absence. Marcus exhaled slowly, then looked at me with steady eyes. "Naomi, you'll need strength for what's coming. Jake trusted you for a reason. We'll stand together." I closed my eyes briefly, feeling both the weight of $10 million and the heavier burden of what it meant. The storm had only just begun, but I could already hear my son's voice in my heart. "Stay strong, stay silent, protect Owen." That evening, long after Owen had fallen asleep in the guest room with his stuffed bear pressed tight against his chest, Marcus placed another envelope in my hands. The handwriting across it was unmistakable. My son's bold script, steady and certain, stared back at me. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal, the crack of paper louder than the ticking of the clock on my mantel. Inside was a letter, written weeks before his death. I unfolded the pages slowly, as though rushing might shatter the last connection I had to his voice. "Mom," it began, "if you're reading this, it means the precautions I feared became necessary. I need you to trust me. Don't tell Sienna what I've left behind. Don't tell her about the trust, the structure, or the protocols. Let her show her hand. Let her make her choices. Silence will protect Owen more than confrontation ever could." My breath caught. Jake had known. Maybe not the exact shape of the betrayal, but he had sensed it. His words carried both sorrow and clarity, like a man who understood the fragility of those he loved and the ruthlessness of those who pretended to love him. He went on, "I've seen signs that Sienna's loyalty isn't with this family. I cannot prove everything, but I've left Marcus with documentation that will guide you if something happens to me. I'm sorry to ask this of you, Mom, but please remember, you've always taught me that patience reveals more truth than anger. Do the same now. Protect Owen. Let silence be your strength." Tears blurred the ink, and I pressed the letter against my heart. My son, even in death, was guiding me. He had trusted me not just as his mother, but as the custodian of his child's future. I read on. "If you ever feel tempted to confront her, remember this. Truth doesn't need shouting. It shows itself in time. And when it does, you'll have the proof. I've given Marcus the emergency protocol. He knows what to do. You don't have to carry this alone." I sat back in my chair, the letter trembling in my hands. The sound of rain pattered softly against the windows, and somewhere in the house the floor creaked, as though Jake's presence had walked through one last time. The weight of his instructions pressed down on me, heavier than grief, heavier than the fortune he had left behind. I wanted to scream, to demand why my son had to shoulder suspicion while alive, why he had to prepare for a betrayal from the woman who should have been his partner. But his words gave me no room for despair. They called me to strength, to strategy, to a silence sharper than any weapon. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its envelope. Then I tucked it into the same drawer where Jake had once left the notebook for Owen. I whispered into the stillness, "I will honor this, Jake. I will protect your boy." That night, I lay awake, the rain tapping against the glass, the letter burning like a brand in my mind. Silence was no longer just my grief. It had become my shield, my vow, and my weapon. The morning after reading Jake's letter, I brewed coffee that tasted bitterer than usual. The kitchen smelled of rain-soaked air drifting in from the cracked window, and I caught myself staring at the drawer where the letter now rested. His words echoed in my mind like a refrain. "Don't tell her, let her show her hand." It didn't take long. Sienna arrived unannounced, her heels clicking against my porch as though she owned the place. She didn't bother to knock twice before stepping in, her smile polished, her tone rehearsed. "Naomi," she said, sweeping her gaze around the living room, "I've been thinking. It doesn't make sense for you to stay in this old house all by yourself. Why don't you transfer the deed to me? I can handle the paperwork, and in exchange you'll have no worries. You deserve rest." Her words dripped with false kindness, every sentence shaped like an invitation, but sharpened like a demand. I motioned for her to sit at the dining table, masking the storm that surged inside me. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through a document already drafted. "Look, I've prepared the transfer papers. All we need is your signature. With the market the way it is, I can put a deposit down on a beautiful condo downtown. Owen will have a modern space when he stays with me, and you won't have to worry about upkeep anymore." I studied her carefully. Her story was rehearsed, yet the cracks showed when she spoke too quickly. Her mention of the condo deposit betrayed more than she realized. She wasn't thinking about Owen's comfort. She was thinking about her freedom. I forced my voice into calm curiosity. "That's generous of you to think of me, Sienna. But Jake always loved this house. Don't you think Owen deserves some stability right now?" For just a fraction of a second, her jaw tightened before she recovered her gracious smile. "Stability is exactly why I'm suggesting this. He needs a fresh start, and so do you. Just sign, Naomi. We'll all be better off inside." I wanted to slam my hand against the table, to shout that I saw through her performance. Instead, I remembered Jake's letter, his insistence on silence. So I tilted my head as though genuinely considering. My fingers brushed the corner of my phone hidden beneath a napkin on the table. The recording app was already running. "Perhaps," I murmured, "but I'll need to think it over. Big decisions shouldn't be rushed." She leaned forward, lowering her voice as if confiding in me. "Naomi, don't be stubborn. You'll regret making this harder than it needs to be. I promise you, I'll make sure you're comfortable. You just have to trust me, trust." The word almost made me laugh. Jake had trusted her once, too. And here she was, speaking like a woman eager to erase his memory with the stroke of a pen. I nodded slowly, letting her believe she had planted the seed. But inside, I knew I had just captured something more valuable than her signature on a page. Her words, recorded in her own voice, full of contradictions she could never explain away. As she left, tossing her hair over her shoulder with the confidence of someone who thought the world was already hers, I stood at the doorway watching the rain fall heavier on the street. The recording safely saved, Jake's instructions alive in my mind, I whispered to myself, "You were right, my son." Silence will show her hand. A week after her push to have me sign away the house, I found myself moving through the quiet halls of Jake's home. The scent of his books and cologne still lingered faintly in the air, and I often stopped just to breathe it in. Owen had fallen asleep early that evening, curled up, on the couch with a blanket pulled to his chin. The storm outside rattled the windows, filling the house with the rhythm of Seattle rain. I carried a basket of laundry down the hallway and paused as I noticed a faint light spilling from the study. The door was cracked open. Inside, Sienna sat alone at Jake's desk, the glow of the lamp catching the edge of her veil from the funeral that she had folded neatly beside her. She was staring at their wedding photograph, her shoulders trembling. At first, I thought it was another act, a rehearsed performance for whoever might walk in. But then I heard the sound. Raw, unguarded sobs. Her face twisted, unmasked by the polish she carried in public. She pressed her fingers against the photograph, whispering words I couldn't quite catch, fragments of regret spilling into the air. It startled me, seeing her break that way. For the first time, I glimpsed the possibility that she had loved him once, or at least loved the life he provided. The ambition, the wealth, the image. It had been real enough for her to mourn its loss. Her tears smeared her mascara, dark lines tracing down her cheeks, and for a fleeting moment she looked less like the adversary I braced myself against, and more like a woman undone by her own contradictions. But then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. She straightened, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, smoothing her hair, painting the mask back over her face. She slid the photograph into the desk drawer and adjusted her blouse as if rehearsing for another audience. By the time she noticed me standing quietly in the doorway, her expression was calm, composed, almost icy. "Oh, Naomi," she said lightly, "I didn't realize you were still up." I forced my face to remain neutral. "I was checking on the laundry. Owen's asleep." She smiled faintly, though her eyes still glistened. "That's good. He needs rest. We all do." I nodded, letting her pass by me in the hallway. As her perfume trailed behind, I thought about what I had just witnessed. It didn't erase the lies or the schemes, but it painted her in colors more complicated than simple malice. She was not just ruthless, she was fractured, and fractures could be dangerous in their own right. I returned to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, the storm outside still battering against the windows. Jake's letter echoed in my thoughts. Let her show her hand. Tonight I had seen another piece of it, not greed or manipulation, but grief, however twisted it might have been. It did not change my resolve, but it reminded me of the delicate balance I had to maintain. Silence was my shield, yes, but understanding her humanity, even briefly, was also part of the battle. The next morning, the air carried a sharp chill, the kind that makes every breath feel like glass. I drove across town to a small office tucked behind an aging strip mall. The sign on the frosted glass door read, "Monroe Investigations." Lila Monroe greeted me, with a firm handshake and eyes that spoke of experience. She was younger than me, but carried herself with the same gravity I had once used in the classroom. "Naomi," she said, lowering her voice, "I have what you asked for." She led me into a cramped office where the blinds were drawn tight against the gray light. From a locked drawer, she pulled out a thick black file and placed it on the desk between us. My stomach turned as she slid it toward me. The weight of it felt heavier than paper should. Inside were photographs, Sienna and Damien hand in hand at a waterfront restaurant, Sienna entering his condo late at night and leaving just before dawn. The timestamp on one photo stabbed me like a blade. It was taken the night after Jake's funeral. She had not even waited a week before stepping fully into her other life. There were text messages too, pages of them printed and highlighted, words about money, about Newport and Grand Cayman, about future resorts and deposits. Sienna's phrases were careless, dripping with greed. Damien's were colder, more calculated. He spoke of investment opportunities, of freedom, of a life unburdened by Owen. My hands shook as I turned the pages, the images searing themselves into memory. Jake had been right. His instincts had not failed him. And now, with Lila's file in front of me, I had the proof he had hoped would surface. Marcus arrived midway through the meeting, his presence steadying me. He skimmed the evidence, his jaw tightening. "This isn't just an affair," he said grimly. "This is neglect. She's planning an escape. The court won't ignore this when the time comes." I closed the file gently, though my pulse thundered. Every page screamed betrayal, but my grief kept me silent. Anger would have been easier. Silence was harder, heavier. But Jake's words in his letter pressed into me like a command. "Don't speak too soon. Let her unravel." Before I left, Lila added one more detail. "She's planning a healing trip," she said, her tone laced with irony. "She's telling people it's to recover from Jake's death. In reality, it's a scouting trip for Damien's project." I carried the file home, sliding it into the same drawer that now held Jake's notebook and his letter. 3 pieces of a puzzle, each more damning than the last. That night, as Owen slept soundly in the next room, I sat at the dining table staring at the evidence. My son had asked me to protect his boy, and now the path was clear. Silence first, action later. The rain tapped against the windows like an impatient reminder. The storm was building, and soon the world would see the truth of who Sienna really was. The trip to Newport was meant to be a family getaway, or at least that was how Sienna had described it. She called it a chance for Owen to experience something refreshing, but I knew better. It was another step in her careful dance with Damien. I agreed to go, not because I trusted her, but because I refused to let Owen out of my sight. The resort loomed tall, glass windows reflecting the ocean like a mirror, its rooftop pool glistening beneath the late afternoon sun. Owen's eyes lit up when he saw the water, the innocence of childhood breaking through the layers of grief he had been carrying. He asked if he could swim, his small voice bubbling with excitement. I hesitated, then agreed, making sure to stay close. Sienna arrived on the deck in a flowing cover-up, Damien trailing just behind her with sunglasses perched on his head. They looked less like mourners and more like vacationers, their laughter jarring against the memory of Jake's grave, only weeks old. I noticed how little attention Sienna gave to Owen. Her phone was in her hand, her smile directed at Damien, her son's joy an afterthought. Owen kicked at the water from the edge, his laughter carrying in the air. For a fleeting moment, I let myself enjoy the sound. Then, in an instant, the joy fractured. Owen leaned too far forward, his balance giving way. I shouted his name as his arms flailed, his small body tipping toward the deep end. I lunged forward, my hands gripping his arm just before he went under. My heart thundered as I pulled him back, his chest heaving, eyes wide with shock. "Grandma," he gasped, clutching at me. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him against my chest as if I could shield him from every danger in the world. Sienna barely looked up from her screen. "He needs to be more careful," she said coolly, before turning back to Damien, who was pointing out property lines along the shore, talking about potential condos in Scottsdale. Their voices blurred together in a language of deals and deposits, words that felt more dangerous than the water had been. Later, when Owen was tucked safely beside me in our room, he whispered, "Grandma, Mom doesn't watch me." "She only watches him." His voice cracked, and his small fingers traced circles on the hotel bed sheet. My chest tightened as I kissed his hair, silently promising him that he was not invisible to me. Before we left Newport, I asked the concierge discreetly for copies of the security footage from the rooftop pool. A kind woman slipped me a small envelope, her eyes sympathetic. I also collected a receipt Damien had carelessly signed at the bar, his name linked to Sienna's room number. These scraps of evidence felt like lifelines, each one another thread woven into the net that would eventually catch her. That night, I stood at the balcony, the ocean wind cold against my skin, the city lights glittering below. Owen slept peacefully in the next room, but my mind raced. I thought of Jake, of his letter, of the trust he placed in me. Silence was still my shield, but the file in my drawer was growing heavier. Back in Seattle, the days blurred into one another, each carrying the weight of responsibility. I settled Owen into a steady routine. School in the mornings, sessions with Dr. Price twice a week, quiet dinners together in the evenings. He clung to structure the way a child lost at sea clings to driftwood. But outside the walls of my house, the world was stirring. Sienna had begun to stir too, her schemes sharper and more reckless. It started with a call from Mrs. Callahan, my neighbor who lived just across the street. One night she had heard raised voices from Jake's old house, Sienna's sharp tone slicing through the night, Owen's smaller voice barely audible in return. Alarmed, she called me, her words shaking. "Naomi, I don't think he's safe there." Should I report it? I told her I would take care of it. But she wasn't the only one who noticed. At school, Ms. Alvarez, the counselor, asked to speak privately with me. She shared her observations. Owen withdrawn in class, his drawings darker, his essays filled with stories of people leaving. "He needs consistency," she said softly. "He talks about you more than his mother." "I'm required to document this." Not long after, Dr. Price echoed similar concerns. He scribbled in his notes during one of Owen's sessions, later telling me gently, "He feels safest with you, Naomi. I'll put that in my report. It matters." The pressure built until one rainy evening, Officer Grant knocked on my door. His uniform was damp, his notebook already open. "We had a call," he explained. "Noise complaint from the Whitaker residence, your daughter-in-law's place. We're obligated to log it. Child Protective Services may review." The words tightened around my chest. CPS. The thought of strangers prying into Owen's already fragile life filled me with dread. Grant assured me the case might close quickly, that the evidence wasn't conclusive. Still, the possibility was there, hanging in the air like a storm cloud. For several days, I lived in a kind of suspended fear. Every time the phone rang, I braced myself for news that CPS had opened a formal file. I imagined courtrooms filled with unfamiliar faces, strangers deciding the future of the boy sleeping under my roof. But the call never came. Instead, the case was temporarily closed for insufficient cause. Relief washed over me, but it came tangled with another emotion: urgency. The net was tightening, but not enough to hold Sienna accountable. She was still free to maneuver, still free to slip away. I could not force the truth into the open before its time. I had to wait, to let her choices draw the picture more clearly. That night, I sat by the window watching the rain pool against the glass. Owen's laughter floated from the living room where he and Mrs. Callahan played a simple card game. The sound steadied me. This wasn't just about money or inheritance. This was about a child who deserved to feel loved, a child who should never wonder why his mother looked past him. I pressed my hand against the cool pane and whispered into the night, "Not yet, Jake." But soon. It was late afternoon when Sienna showed up at my door, a leather folder tucked under her arm. She didn't ask to come in, she simply stepped across the threshold as if the house already belonged to her. Her perfume filled the air, sharp and deliberate, the kind of scent meant to mask nerves. I guided her into the dining room, where the light fell across the table and revealed the strain around her eyes. She sat down and spread the folder open with a practiced flourish. Inside were neatly typed documents, pages stamped and tabbed, signatures marked with sticky notes. "Naomi," she said in a voice soft enough to sound gentle, firm enough to cut, "it's time we stop dragging this out. Sign these papers and everything will be resolved." I glanced at the top page. Property transfer, guardianship waiver, clauses buried in dense paragraphs that would strip me of every right I held over Owen's trust and my own home. At the bottom, Damien's name was faintly scribbled in a margin, as if he had reviewed the draft himself. My hands stayed folded in my lap. "What exactly are you asking me to give up?" Her smile was quick, almost impatient. "Not give up. Exchange. You'll be taken care of. I'll ensure you have a stipend for life. All you need to do is step aside gracefully. Owen will adapt. Children always do." I felt my chest tighten. My grandson was not a pawn to be moved across her board. Still, I kept my expression calm, my voice steady. "And in return?" She leaned closer, her whisper venomous. "In return, you won't be dragged through legal hell. Damien has connections, projects waiting offshore. Grand Cayman is just the beginning. Don't stand in our way, Naomi. You're too old for battles like this." The words chilled me more than any winter storm. She was no longer hiding. She was laying the cards on the table, confident that intimidation would break me. I remembered Jake's letter, his plea to let her expose herself. And here she was, doing exactly that. Unseen beneath the table, my phone lay in my pocket, its microphone already capturing every word. I forced myself to nod as though considering. "You've thought this through," I murmured. Her eyes flashed with triumph. "Of course." Jake never knew how to build a future. Damien and we know how to make money work. It's time you stopped clinging to the past. I sat back, studying her as though she were a case study in one of my old lectures. She believed her performance flawless, her offer irresistible. But every sentence she spoke was another crack in the mask, another admission that would one day stand against her in court. Finally, I closed the folder gently, sliding it back toward her. "I'll need time," I said. "Don't take too long," she replied, her tone suddenly sharp. "Deals like this don't wait forever." She snapped the folder shut and rose from the table, her heels clicking against the floor as she swept toward the door. When the house fell quiet again, I pressed a hand to my pocket, feeling the phone warm against my palm. The recording was safe. Jake's plan was unfolding, and though the storm grew darker, I knew I was not defenseless. The folder sat on my dining table for days, its sharp corners cutting into my peace every time I walked past. I could not bring myself to throw it away, though every line of it was poison. Instead, I left it there, unopened, like a test of my will. I would catch myself staring at it during quiet mornings while Owen ate his cereal, or late at night when the house had fallen silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. One evening, after Owen had gone to bed, I poured myself a cup of tea and finally pulled the folder closer. My hands trembled as I opened it, the inked words blurring under the weight of exhaustion. I read the clauses, the signatures waiting for me, the promises of care and comfort that masked the theft beneath. I imagined what it would feel like to sign, just one pen stroke, and the struggle would be over. No more late-night whispers from lawyers, no more fear of courtrooms, no more watching Sienna circle Owen like a hawk. The temptation was real, and it scared me. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that surrender could bring peace. I lifted a pen, my fingers tightening around it. The rain outside lashed the windows, and my reflection in the glass looked like a woman ready to collapse. Then my eyes drifted to the drawer across the room. Slowly, I stood and opened it. Inside lay Jake's letter, the one that had become my anchor. I unfolded it, and his words rose from the page like a voice carried on the wind. "Don't tell her, don't give in, protect Owen, let silence be your strength." The pen slipped from my hand. Tears welled in my eyes, not from weakness, but from the sudden memory of my son's face, his conviction, his trust in me. He had known this moment would come, the moment when fatigue would whisper louder than courage. He had left me this letter to pull me back from the edge. I pressed the paper to my chest, whispering into the quiet room. "I almost failed you, Jake. But I won't. Not now." With shaking hands, I gathered the documents back into the folder and sealed it shut. The next morning, I delivered it to Marcus's office. He took it without a word, only giving me a look that carried both understanding and resolve. "This is enough," he said softly. "We'll use it when the time comes." As I walked back to my car, the weight in my chest began to lift. I had come close to surrender, closer than I wanted to admit. But Jake's letter had saved me again, the ink of his words stronger than any signature I could have given. That night, when Owen curled beside me on the couch and fell asleep against my shoulder, I kissed the top of his head and whispered, "We'll make it, sweetheart. Your father made sure of that." The courthouse loomed against a slate-gray sky, its stone steps slick from the morning rain. I held Owen's hand as we climbed, his small fingers gripping mine with a mix of fear and trust. Marcus walked beside us, briefcase in hand, his expression steady and unreadable. This was the hearing Jake had prepared us for without ever saying so, the one that would determine whether silence had been enough, whether truth would finally begin to surface. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of varnished wood and old paper. Judge Hart presided from the bench, his face carved with lines of patience, the kind of man who measured not only evidence but the weight of human character. Sienna sat across from me, dressed in flawless black, every hair pinned into place. Valerie Knox, her attorney, leaned close to her, whispering strategies like a coach before a game. Damien was nowhere in sight, but his absence hung heavy in the room. Owen sat quietly between me and Marcus, his legs dangling off the bench. He clutched the small toy car he had tucked into his pocket, his anchor in the storm. I laid my hand gently over his, reminding him he wasn't alone. The hearing began with formalities, statements read, documents submitted. Marcus stood, his voice firm as he presented evidence. The updated will, Jake's trust instructions, and the preliminary observations from Dr. Price and Ms. Alvarez about Owen's well-being. He laid out the pattern of neglect, not with anger but with precision, letting the reports speak for themselves. Valerie rose in response, her tone sharp. She painted Sienna as a grieving widow unfairly maligned, a woman struggling to balance career and motherhood under impossible circumstances. She emphasized Sienna's rights as a mother, her position as Jake's wife, her entitlement to maintain authority. Every word was polished, designed to shield Sienna's image. But then came Miss Flores. She took the stand, her neutral tone steady, her report thorough. She described her supervised visits, how Sienna often prioritized her phone over Owen, how she posed for photographs instead of engaging with him, how his eyes followed her with confusion rather than comfort. She did not embellish. She did not accuse. She simply observed, and her words carried more weight than arguments ever could. I watched Judge Hart's face as he listened. He made no grand gestures, but I saw the shift, the careful filing away of details, the weighing of responsibility. Finally, he spoke. His voice filled the room with quiet authority. Pending further review, custody of Owen Whitaker will remain under the temporary guardianship of his grandmother, Naomi Whitaker. Mrs. Stanton is prohibited from removing the child from the state of Washington without court approval. Visitation will continue under supervision as outlined by Miss Flores. The gavel came down, sharp as a heartbeat. Relief flooded me, though I kept my composure. Beside me, Owen squeezed my hand, whispering, "Does this mean I get to stay with you, Grandma?" I bent close, pressing a kiss to his temple. "Yes, sweetheart. For now, you're safe." Across the aisle, Sienna's composure cracked. She whispered furiously to Valerie, her face taut with fury, but the judge had already left the bench. The storm in her eyes told me the battle was far from over, yet for the first time I felt a current shift in our favor. As we left the courtroom, Marcus murmured, "This was the step Jake wanted. Now she's boxed in. All we have to do is hold steady." Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds parted just enough for a single ray of sunlight to strike the courthouse steps. I gripped Owen's hand tighter, and together we walked into the light. The weeks that followed the court hearing settled into a rhythm that felt almost like breathing again. Owen lived with me full-time now, and though his grief still surfaced in quiet moments, I could see small signs of healing. He laughed more easily when Mrs. Callahan brought over her homemade soup. He focused longer during his sessions with Dr. Price, and every evening he curled into my side as I read from Jake's old storybooks, his eyelids heavy with the peace of routine. Still, the shadow of Sienna lingered. She visited under the supervision of Miss Flores, arriving each time with carefully chosen outfits and a polished smile. She brought toys wrapped in glossy paper, trinkets meant to impress, not comfort. Owen accepted them politely, but I watched the way he placed them aside, uninterested. He seemed to sense that her gifts were substitutes for something she could not give. One Saturday afternoon, the three of us sat in the park under Ms. Flores's quiet watch. The air was brisk, the grass damp from the morning rain. Owen kicked at the ground with the toe of his shoe, unusually quiet. Sienna crouched down beside him, her voice sugary. "Look, sweetheart, Mommy got you something special for next time. A new game console. You'll love it." Owen didn't look up. Instead, he turned to me, his eyes wide with a question that carried the weight of years he was too young to bear. His voice trembled as he asked, "Mom, why don't you love me the way Grandma does?" The words hung in the air like a bell tolling across a silent field. Sienna froze, her lips parting but no sound coming out. For the first time, her mask slipped completely, not into rage, not into performance, but into stunned silence. Her son had spoken aloud what I had long feared he felt. Miss Flores's pen scratched quickly across her notepad, her gaze flicking from Owen to Sienna. She did not intervene. She did not need to. The moment spoke for itself. Sienna finally forced a laugh, brittle and hollow. "Oh, darling, of course I love you. Mommy has been so busy, so distracted. But you'll see. Things will be better soon." Owen shook his head, his small shoulders curling inward. He moved closer to me, pressing his cheek against my arm. My heart ached, but I held him steady, wrapping my arm around him without a word. On the drive home, the silence in the car was different, not the silence of grief, but the silence of a truth finally spoken. Owen had given voice to the wound that had been growing in him, and though it broke me, it also steeled me. Jake's letter had asked me to let Sienna show her hand. Today, Owen had shown hers instead, not through evidence or paperwork, but through the absence of a mother's love. That night, after Owen was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with Dr. Price's latest notes and Miss Flores's report from the visit. The details were simple: observations, facts, quotes. Yet in those pages lay the unvarnished truth. Sienna was losing the one role that mattered most, not because of me, but because of her own choices. I folded the papers, placed them in the drawer beside Jake's letter in the black file, and whispered into the quiet house, "We're closer, Jake. Closer than ever." The confrontation came quietly, not in a courtroom or with an audience, but in my living room on a late winter evening. The rain outside fell in steady sheets, drumming against the roof like a warning. I had just finished setting Owen's schoolwork aside when Sienna arrived, her coat still damp, her hair undone in a way that looked less like carelessness and more like unraveling. She carried no polished mask this time. Her eyes were red, her hands unsteady. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. Instead, she placed a slim folder on the coffee table and collapsed onto the couch across from me. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Damien's leaving for Cayman next week and he expects me to follow. I thought I could balance it all, but I can't. I can't keep Owen and have the life I want. I'm tired of pretending." I stayed still, watching her. My heart clenched for Owen, but my face remained calm as Jake had taught me. "What are you saying, Sienna?" She met my eyes, and for once there was no performance, no veil. "I'll sign whatever you want." "Custody, guardianship, the trust. You can take it all. Just let me go." The words struck like cold wind, carrying both cruelty and confession. She wasn't giving up for Owen's sake. She was giving up for her own freedom, and still, the significance was immense. This was the moment Jake had told me to wait for, the moment she revealed herself without me saying a word. I reached slowly for the folder. Inside were documents drafted with Valerie's help, stripped now of any pretense of negotiation. Her signature lines were marked, and at the bottom of each page she had already scrawled her name in hurried strokes. I pulled out my phone, its recorder running in my palm, capturing her voice as she repeated the words, "I don't want this life." "You take it. I'm done." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument we had ever had. Sienna sat slumped, her shoulders curved. Inward, her ambition drained into bitterness. She looked less like a rival and more like a woman hollowed out by choices that had consumed her. For a brief moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. But then I remembered Owen's voice in the park. "Why don't you love me the way Grandma does?" The boy asleep upstairs deserved better than pity, wasted on someone who had already chosen herself over him. I gathered the papers, placing them neatly into a folder of my own. My voice was steady as I said, "You'll have no claim left, Sienna. Once this is filed, your part in Owen's life will be only what the court allows." She gave a bitter laugh, half defiant and half broken. Do what you want. Just don't call me when he asks for me. I won't come back. She rose, pulling her coat tighter, and walked out into the rain without looking back. I sat there for a long while, listening to the storm rage against the windows, the signed papers cool under my hand. Jake's voice echoed in my heart once more. Don't speak too soon. Let her show her hand. She had, and now the game was over. The courthouse felt different this time. The heavy marble floors and echoing halls no longer seemed intimidating but steady, like pillars holding up the life I was about to reclaim for Owen. Marcus walked beside me, carrying the thick folder that held every document, every report, every piece of evidence carefully gathered over the months. Sienna's final signatures lay at the heart of it all, the ink of her surrender sealing what no argument could undo. Inside the courtroom, Judge Hart reviewed the file in silence. His glasses rested low on his nose, his pen tapping softly against the bench as he read. Finally, he lifted his eyes and spoke with the clarity of finality. Guardianship of Owen Whitaker is hereby granted to his grandmother, Naomi Whitaker. All associated trusts will remain under her care until the child reaches majority age. The petition for custody transfer stands approved. The gavel struck once, sharp as a heartbeat. My shoulders dropped with relief I had carried too long. I had done it. For Jake. For Owen. For myself. Marcus leaned close, his voice low but filled with quiet triumph. It's over, Naomi. He's safe now, I nodded, though words failed me. My throat tightened with gratitude and grief interwoven so tightly they were impossible to separate. Across the aisle, Valerie shuffled her papers quickly, her client absent. There was nothing left to contest. As we left the courthouse, Owen ran to my side, his small hand slipping into mine. He had been waiting with Mrs. Callahan, who smiled softly, her basket of soup containers swinging from her arm, as if she had known I would need comfort today. Owen's eyes sparkled with a light I had not seen in months. "Grandma," he said, his voice hushed with solemn pride, "Dad would be happy, right?" I knelt before him, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "Yes, sweetheart." He would be proud. More than anything, he wanted you safe. Owen reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper. He pressed it into my hand. I unfolded it slowly and gasped. It was Jake's watch, the one he wore every day, the one I had seen him check absent-mindedly during lectures and trials, the one I had tucked away when packing his things. I hadn't realized Owen had found it. He placed it in my palm with a seriousness that belied his age. "Dad would want you to keep this. He said once that watches are for people who know how to wait. You waited for the truth, Grandma." Tears blurred my vision as I clasped the cool metal against my heart. The watch ticked steadily, each second a reminder of Jake's trust in me, of the silence I had carried like armor, of the boy now safe by my side. Later that week, Marcus helped me establish the Jake Whitaker Scholarship Fund, a small portion of the trust dedicated to supporting students who dreamed of studying law but lacked resources. It was a way to honor Jake, to let his work ripple outward even in his absence. That night, as I wound the watch and placed it on my nightstand, I whispered into the quiet house, "We're safe, Jake. He's safe, and your legacy lives on." The cemetery was quiet that morning, the kind of stillness that feels like the world is holding its breath. A thin veil of mist floated between the rows of headstones, and the air carried the faint sweetness of wet grass. Owen walked beside me, his small hand tucked into mine, his steps careful but steady. He was older now in ways no child should have to be, but his eyes shone with a clarity that gave me strength. We stopped before Jake's grave. The stone was simple, carved with his name, the dates that bookended his life, and a single line he had once written in a law school notebook. "Justice is silent, but it stands." I traced the letters with my fingertips, the cool stone grounding me as memories swelled. Owen crouched down, his hand resting gently against the grave. His voice was soft but carried in the quiet air. "We're safe, Dad." Grandma made sure of it. My breath caught. The words struck deep, not as a child's reassurance, but as a truth spoken from the heart. Tears welled in my eyes, spilling freely this time. I let them fall, no longer holding them back behind composure. I stood there not as the silent shield I had been, but as a mother finally allowing herself to grieve. I knelt beside Owen, wrapping my arm around him as we sat together in the damp grass. "Your father loved you more than anything," I whispered. "Everything he did, everything he left, it was for you." We stayed there a long time, the mist curling around us like a shroud. Birds stirred in the trees, their wings breaking the silence with gentle rustles. For once I didn't feel rushed to move on. Grief and peace shared the same space, woven together in the quiet morning. Before we left, Owen reached into his pocket and pulled out the toy car he always carried. He placed it gently at the base of the stone. "You can keep this, Dad," he said, his voice steady. "I don't need it anymore." I kissed the top of his head, my tears dampening his hair. The gesture was small, but it was a gift of healing, a boy giving something away not out of loss, but out of love. As we walked back toward the car, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. The headstone stood firm against the mist, the toy car bright against the gray stone. My heart ached, but beneath the ache was a quiet strength, the kind that whispered, we had survived, and we would go on. 3 years passed, and with them came a gentler rhythm to our days. Time did not erase the loss, but it softened the edges, carving space for new beginnings. Owen was 11 now, taller, steadier, with a confidence that came not from wealth or gifts, but from knowing he was loved. That spring, he performed in his school play. I sat in the front row, my heart swelling as he delivered his lines with clarity and courage. When the applause filled the auditorium, he scanned the crowd until his eyes found mine. His smile lit up his face, and in that instant, I saw Jake in him, not just in the slope of his jaw or the warmth of his eyes, but in the strength of spirit that ran through our family like a quiet current. At home, the garden bloomed again. The small corner we had dedicated to Jake's memory was full of wildflowers, their colors dancing in the breeze. Owen had helped plant them, insisting that his father deserved a garden that grew brighter every year. On quiet afternoons, he would sit there with his sketchbook, drawing flowers and trees, sometimes even the watch I now wore around my wrist. As for me, I found purpose in teaching again, not in a lecture hall, but in the community center nearby. Once a week, I gathered a group of older neighbors and taught them painting. Some came with trembling hands, some with stories heavy as stone, but together we found release in color and brushstrokes. Healing came in unexpected places, in laughter over crooked lines, in the way art gave them a language for things too heavy for words. Mrs. Callahan still brought her soup, claiming it tasted better shared. She often lingered to watch Owen's drawings or help me prune the roses in the yard. Our home had become more than a refuge. It was a place where community, once fractured, had woven itself back together. The scholarship fund Marcus and I created in Jake's name had already supported its first students. Letters arrived from young people who wrote about dreams of law school, of defending the voiceless. Each envelope felt like Jake's voice echoing forward, a ripple of justice that extended beyond his years. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of amber, Owen slipped his hand into mine. He was quiet for a moment before saying, "Grandma, Dad's watch. It ticks louder when I'm near you. Maybe it's his way of telling us he's proud." I looked down at the watch, its steady rhythm pulsing against my wrist, and tears blurred the sunset before me. I pulled him close, pressing a kiss to his hair. "Yes, sweetheart. He is proud. Of you, of us, of everything we've carried through." The wind carried the scent of blooming flowers, and I closed my eyes, letting it fill me. The grief was still there, but it no longer hollowed me. It had become part of the soil from which love grew again. Our true inheritance was not the fortune Jake left, nor the battles we had endured to protect it. Our true legacy was resilience, love that endured through silence, and the healing that came when we chose to hold on, not to bitterness, but to each other. And as the evening deepened, I whispered into the quiet air, "We're safe, Jake. We're safe, and your legacy lives on."